Hello savages, welcome to Gamertopia. Today we're going to go over my end game build for Barbarian. This build has been great for speedrunning through the vaults and Malphus and Duriel speed rotations. It deals a ton of overpower damage and makes killing all the game's bosses quick and easy. Before we get into the build, I want to say thank you to all of my current subscribers for joining and thank you for all of your support. If you're watching this now and are not subscribed, make sure you do. It will keep you up to date with all of my upcoming Diablo videos and it helps me out a ton with the YouTube algorithm understanding my target demographic. Let's dive into the build. If you follow my previous video for the 50 plus barbarian leveling and boss melting build, which I'll link in the description, that is a smooth transition into this build. It uses a lot of the same skills and gear, but it sure does hit a lot harder. In the basic skills, we're going to use any 2 points. We won't be using a basic attack with this build, so put them wherever you want. In the core skill tree, we're going to start off with 1 rank of Whirlwind, and we'll also use Enhanced Whirlwind, which will help us with our Fury management. Whirlwind is a great core skill for groups of enemies, but we're actually going to be using this skill in another way, which I'll get back to later on in the build. Next, we'll max out Hammer of the Ancients with Enhanced and Furious Hammer of the Ancients. The Enhanced Hammer of the Ancients is going to give us a big boost in Fury regeneration based on the amount of enemies hit, up to 30%. Hammer of the Ancients is going to be our main attack for this build, so we'll end up getting that effect often. Now we can head down to our defensive skill tree, and we'll start by maxing out Imposing Presence for an 18% boost to our maximum health, and we'll use 1 point in Martial Vigor just for a little extra damage reduction against elites and bosses. Here we'll use 1 rank of Rallying Cry with Enhanced and Tactical Rallying Cry. These will give us Unstoppable to break out of any crowd control we come across, and it will also give us a big boost in Fury regeneration. We'll be taking 1 rank from these 2 passives next, the first being Outburst, which is going to give us a little bit of Thorns, but this is just going to play off of the next passive, Tough as Nails, which is going to give our Thorns a little bit of boost and then make them cause bleeding damage as well. We're going to want bleeding damage because we're going to be using the Blood Rage Paragon board, which has some nodes that we'll be using to increase our damage to bleeding enemies and give us damage reduction from bleeding enemies. We'll cover that more at the Paragon board section. Lastly, for this tree, we'll take 1 rank of Challenging Shout with Enhanced and Tactical Challenging Shout. This gives us the ability to taunt enemies with a nice boost to our damage reduction and will give us Fury regeneration when we are attacked. Heading down to the Brawling skill tree, we'll start with 1 rank of Charge with Enhanced Charge and Power Charge. Charge is great for staying mobile in fights, and with Power Charge, if you hit 3 enemies, it's going to give you a 9-second decrease to your total cooldown for the skill. And currently with this setup, we can use this just about every 3 seconds as long as you hit 3 enemies with it. Now we'll take just a few passives out of this bottom bracket, starting with Aggressive Resistance, which we'll use 1 rank of for just a little bit of damage reduction while berserking. This is going to open up Battle Fervor as well, which we'll use 1 rank of just to proc berserking anytime we use charge. Then we'll also want to max out Prolific Fury for 18% Fury regeneration while berserking. As I'm sure you can see, we are really stacking up the resource generation with this build, which is why it hardly ever drops below 50%. In the Weapon Mastery tree, we'll be using just a few passives, the first being Pit Fighter. With 3 ranks of this, it gives us 9% increased damage to close enemies and 6% damage reduction from distance enemies. Then we'll go down to the bottom here and take 1 rank of Thick Skin for just a little bit of Fortify anytime we are attacked, and this will also open up Counter Offensive, which will give us a 12% increased damage when we are over 50% Fortify. For the ultimate skill tree, we'll max out Heavy Handed, Brute Force, and Wallop. These give us increased critical strike damage and overpower damage with our 2-handed weapons, and we'll also get 15% increased damage with bludgeoning weapons. We'll also be using these 3 passives to the left, the first being 1 rank of Tempered Fury for an extra 3 maximum Fury, but this also opens us up to max out Furious Impulse and Invigorating Fury. This is going to give us 6 Fury every time we swap weapons and heal us for 9% total health whenever we use 100 Fury. These passives are going to be super beneficial to this build since we'll be using a ton of Fury and each one of our skills will be swapping to a new weapon, so we're going to be getting a lot of extra Fury regeneration from that. Lastly, we'll be using Wrath of the Berserker for our ultimate skill, and we'll use both modifiers as well. This is going to give us a huge boost to damage output, movement speed, and Fury regeneration. When we use this, it basically will just delete 90% of the enemies we face. Lastly, our key passive will be Unbridled Rage for 135% increase in damage with 100% Fury cost from our Whirlwind and Hammer of the Ancients. With all the Fury regeneration we have in this build, it'll be well worth it. For our expertise, we'll use the 2-handed two-handed axe expertise, which increases the damage we do to vulnerable enemies and gives us a big boost to our crit chance against those vulnerable enemies. With that, we'll get into the Paragon board, which is where we will start being able to make enemies vulnerable. For the starter board, we'll be using the exploit glyph. This is super important in this build because we need something to cause vulnerability to our enemies. Vulnerability gives us a huge 20% damage increase, and this glyph will also increase the damage we do to vulnerable enemies. The next board is going to be the Warbringer board. On this one, we'll use the Crusher glyph to give us a nice boost to damage with maces. Hammer of the Ancients will be using a two-handed mace to attack with, so this will be directly affecting that. We'll also wrap around the top here and grab the Warbringer legendary node for Fortify equal to 15% of our maximum life every time we use 75 Fury. This is going to be every time we drop Hammer of the Ancients, since it is costing us 75 Fury to use. With this, we'll have Fortify up for the majority of any dungeon or boss battle. Now we'll attach the Carnage board to the left. On this board, we're going to be getting a ton of extra berserking damage, and we'll also use the Ire glyph here for even more of a boost to that damage. The Carnage legendary glyph is also going to give us a stacking attack speed increase while berserking up to 16%. At the bottom of this board, we'll attach the Blood Rage board. We'll use the Martial glyph on this board, which is going to give us some extra damage to bleeding enemies and damage reduction from bleeding enemies. This is why we need the Outburst and Tough as Nails passives. These will give us a nice extra boost to our damage and survivability. This glyph is also going to be giving our Shout skills the ability to reduce the cooldown of our Charge and Wrath of the Berserker skills. Before exiting this board, we'll also take the Blood Rage legendary glyph for a chance to give us berserking with a huge boost in damage based on our damage while berserking bonus. To the left, we'll attach the Decimator board. We'll use the Dominate glyph to increase our overpower damage and to give us a guaranteed overpower after not overpowering for 30 seconds. We'll also use the Decimator legendary glyph on this board, giving us an increased damage when we make an enemy vulnerable, which will be often due to the exploit glyph. It also is going to give us an additional damage boost when we overpower a vulnerable enemy. The order you place the last two boards don't really matter because we likely won't have high enough stats to get any of the additional bonuses from the rare glyphs, but I have the Weapons Master board attached to the top of the Carnage board. We'll use the Weapons Master legendary node for 4% of our maximum fury every time we swap weapons. A quick side note related to the Weapons Master node, you'll want to assign your Charge and Whirlwind skills to either your slashing or dual wield weapons. I would suggest using your slashing weapon to Whirlwind since you'll likely get more damage from your two-handed weapon and you'll likely be using Whirlwind more often. Just in case you don't know how to assign your weapons, I'll cover that part quickly. You'll go into your skill assignments and hover over the skill you want to assign. Assuming you're on PC, you'll click your scroll wheel button and you can cycle through your skill assignments. Alright, back to our Paragon board. The last Paragon board we're going to use is going to be attached to the left side of the Carnage board, and this one is going to be the Bone Breaker board. We'll get a little bit of fortified generation and damage reduction while fortified from these nodes here, but we are mostly just using the board for the Bone Breaker legendary node. Now for the construct, we'll use Flash of Adrenaline for our first governing stone. We'll use Genesis, duration support, and tactical support with this. This is going to give us a 150% increase to our skills from Genesis, and with duration and tactical support, this is going to be a constant effect since our cooldown and duration will both be at 12 seconds. Our second governing stone will be Tempest, and we'll use bleeding support and resource support with Evernight. Tempest will do a little bit of damage for us, but it's also going to increase our bleeding damage through bleeding support, give us Fury every time we use this skill, and with Evernight, it's going to give us a +4 to all skills for 2 seconds each time it's cast. This will be a constant effect since the cooldown of Tempest will be around 1 second. This is basically a second Shaco that we can take advantage of. Now let's check out what gear we'll be using. For the helmet, we'll use Harlequin Crest if you have it. With the +4 to all skills, this is hard to pass up. If you don't have this, use Tusk Helm or Godslayer Helm as an alternative. On the chest, we'll want overpower damage with bludgeoning weapons, total armor percentage, ranks of Challenging Shout, ranks of Rallying Cry, and Juggernaut's Aspect for some extra armor. On the gloves, we'll use attack speed, critical strike chance, overpower damage, ranks of Hammer of the Ancients, and aspect of Ancestral Charge. This aspect will give our charge an increased hit size to make the chance of decreasing the cooldown easier and give it a little extra damage with each ancestor doing 30% skill damage. The pants will be Tybalt's Will. If you have to choose, I would prioritize the damage increase percentage while unstoppable over the other stats, meaning if you have a Tybalt's Will with 40% damage increase with not so great stats and one with good stats and a 20 or 30% damage increase. The 40% damage increase one will definitely be more beneficial. On the boots, we're going to use elemental resistances for the most part. Since we are lacking this a lot, you may even want all 4 stats to be resistances. I'm using movement speed on here for 1, but I am just a few percentage points shy on shadow resistance, so I could have opted to use that here. We'll also use Relentless Berserker's aspect, which will give our Whirlwind and Hammer of the Ancients up to a 40% chance to give us 2 seconds of berserking. Since Whirlwind hits quite often while being channeled, this will give us a great probability of increasing our berserking duration. Our first two-handed weapon will be a two-handed mace, which gives us a nice boost to overpower damage as a weapon, but we'll also want to use the stats for overpower damage, vulnerable damage, damage to close enemies, berserking duration, and we'll also have Earth Striker's aspect. This aspect can double the overpower damage we do when we swap weapons 8 times. Each of our attacking skills are using a separate weapon. The 2 one-handed weapons we'll be using will both be maces, of course, to increase our overpower damage even more. We'll also want to use strength, overpower damage, core skill damage, and damage while berserking. I do have all stats and vulnerable damage on my second mace, but having a double of the first one would be more beneficial. For aspects, we'll want to use Aspect of Limitless Rage and Edgemaster's aspect for an increase to our core skill damage. For the two-handed slashing weapon, we'll be using an axe to take advantage of the expertise, and we'll also want overpower damage, core skill damage, damage to close enemies, and damage while berserking. And we'll also be using Aspect of Ancestral Force here. This is going to increase the damage of our Hammer of the Ancients by up to 30%, and since we're using this as our main damage causing ability, we'll definitely want that. Then for the first ring, we'll use crit chance, vulnerable damage, damage while berserking, resource generation, and Aspect of Echoing Fury for a little extra fury generation. The second ring will be Ring of Red Furor. This ring guarantees a critical strike for Hammer of the Ancients after using 100 fury within 3 seconds. This is going to work great with our amulet, which is going to be Banished Lord's Talisman. This talisman will give us up to 120% damage increase to our core skills when they overpower and critically strike at the same time. Since we have gear and skills that guarantee both critical strikes and overpowering strikes, these will definitely cross over for a massive amount of damage. As far as how to play this build, we'll start off most battles by using Charge. Since we don't have any basic attacks to gain Fury, this is the easiest way to gain a ton of Fury right off the bat. After you've gained that initial amount of Fury, you'll pretty much always have available Fury unless you are using Whirlwind or Hammer of the Ancients and not hitting any enemies. For attacking, you'll just alternate between Whirlwind and Hammer of the Ancients. Use your shouts to gain their extra buffs and benefits. Charge will have a short cooldown as long as you're continuing to hit enemies with it, so use that for some quick movement and to proc some extra berserk time. Then use Wrath of the Berserker and Rallying Cry together for the largest benefit against bosses or large groups of elite enemies. With this build, you're sure to be able to crush all of the endgame content of Season 3. Let me know in the comments if you are using this build and what you think of it. And of course, make sure to stay tuned to the channel for more content on the upcoming trials of the Gauntlet.